I killed and dismembered my friend because of a video game. My name is Daniel Petrie, and I was 16 at the time of the crime in 2007. I played video games regularly, and that's how I met Gabriel Kuhn, who was 12 at the time. We played almost all the time together, and one day he asked me if he could borrow 20,000 coins from a game called Tibia, the equivalent of $1,000. He promised to pay me back as soon as possible, so I agreed to lend him the coins he wanted. At that point, Gabriel stopped answering my messages, which surprised me greatly. He then removed me from his list of friends on our favorite game, and I never heard from him again. I couldn't believe it and went mad. So I drew up a plan for revenge. I hid in Gabriel's house and waited for Gabriel to be alone. And one day it was the perfect moment. His mother had left and he was alone. So I knocked on his door and he opened up to me. I forced my way into his house and locked the door. I then started torturing him and raped him. Then I took the power cable from his computer and strangled him with it. He stopped moving and I took his body and tried to take him to the cellar of the house, but as I moved him, I realized that his body was too heavy, so I started to cut off his legs. And that's when Gabriel started to wake up, but I continued what I was doing all the same. I then continued to move the body, and his brother arrived shortly afterwards, discovering the horrible crime scene I had committed.
This might be the most gruesome death of all time, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This is 18-year-old Nikki Castoris, and on Halloween 2006, she crashed her father's Porsche 11 driving at more than 100 miles per hour. She was trying to switch lanes when she suddenly clipped another car, lost control, and then flew over the middle of the highway onto traffic lanes and into a concrete toll booth. And when police arrived, they walked into literally a nightmare. They arrived minutes later and they found Nikki's body still strapped to the driver's seat, but her head, however, was no longer attached to it. Nikki's head was completely severed in half and it wasn't a head anymore. I can't even describe what it looks like because it's so disturbing. The wreckage and the scene were so brutal that the coroner wouldn't let her parents identify her body. But unfortunately, her parents were not spared from seeing the gruesome scene. Photographs of Nikki's death had somehow found their way onto the internet and they spread extremely quickly. MySpace pages who were acting as some sort of tribute for Nikki's death posted the horrifying pictures of the accident. Nikki's parents then received countless emails of the photographs, and there was no escaping the trauma. I really urge you never to look up this photo because it might be one of the most disturbing things you will ever see. This case should be an eye-opener to everybody to not drive recklessly, because as you can tell, your life can be taken from you in a split second.
Okay, actually though, that's a crazy story. Kayla Unbian was just 9 years old in 2017 when she was abducted in Chicago. Her father had just won custody of her, and when he went to go pick her up from a camping trip that her and her mother was on, she was gone. Kayla's mom took her and they split, and he was pretty sure that he was never going to see her again. But then Netflix has this show called Unsolved Mysteries, and they aired an episode about children that were kidnapped by their parents. At the end of the episode, they flashed this image on the screen, and it is only on screen for 4 seconds. But then flash forward to last month, there's a person shopping in a grocery store in North Carolina, and she sees this woman in the store and she's like, that's the woman from the poster. The woman in question is with a 16-year-old girl, so the shopper runs to the front desk and is like, we have to call the cops right now. And they were right. The cops picked them up and they were able to reunite Kayla with her dad 5 years later. This goes to show that even when you're watching something really fast, your brain is still registering it and you can still use that information to potentially help someone.
My husband killed me and bricked me into a wall after a violent argument, and my body was only discovered 9 years later in the attic of our house. My name is Sabora Gagani, and I was 22 years old at the time of the incident in 2014. I was living with my boyfriend, Marco Gallo Romero, who was 36 years old at the time. Initially, everything seemed fine, but I quickly realized that it was just a facade of his personality because our relationship became toxic. I even talked to my mother, informing her that I urgently needed to break free from his control and leave, but I didn't have time to do so. On July 7th, 2014, Marco and I had an argument, and he stabbed me. He then decided to make a hole in the wall of the attic of our house, and that's where he chose to hide my body. My family quickly became worried about my disappearance, and Marco assured them that I had run away without leaving a trace. Yet he knew the truth. It was on May 17, 2022 that Marco was arrested, not for my murder, but for that of his girlfriend Paula. He stabbed her 14 times. Once at the police station, he confessed to killing me and bricking me 9 years earlier. He then pointed out the exact location of my body, and I was able to be identified by the tattoos I had on my body. So, in your opinion, what punishment does he deserve?
I was tortured to death and raped by 100 gang members. My name is Junko Futaba, and this is my story. I was only 17 years old and living a peaceful life in Tokyo. I was a studious student, but everything changed when my classmate Hiroshi Miyano made advances towards me, which I refused on November 22nd, 1988, when I was walking home from school. I was kidnapped by him and 3 other men. They took me to a hotel. They held me captive and tortured me for 44 long days. I was raped and beaten every day. I was their punching bag. They started by inserting all sorts of objects like lighted bulbs and fireworks into my private parts. They also had fun hanging me from the ceiling with ropes. They made me take my own urine and eat all kinds of insects, including cockroaches. Then my tormentors invited other people to participate in my rape and torture. On January 4th, 1989, after losing a video game, they beat me for 2 hours with a baseball bat, and burned my eyelids with hot wax. I was disfigured. I no longer had any strength. They ended up burning me alive. I succumbed to my injuries. Right after that, Hiroshi Miyano was sentenced to 17 years in prison, but some received only 8 years in prison and were released.
I bet you didn't know that the original Barbie was based on an R-rated German escort doll. My page is all for people with dark curiosities, and if that's you, I think you'll like the podcast. Okay, so in the 1940s, there was this very provocative German cartoon called Build Lily. And Lily was described as being a gold-digging call girl who would seduce wealthy men. And mind you, this is the 40s, so this is really dicey for the time. Like, here's Lily joking about taking her bikini off in front of a police officer. So by the 50s, they make a doll version of her that's like a gag gift. It's even dicier and more inappropriate than the cartoon was, and men loved it. They just basically gave it to each other. So around this time, Ruth Handler, who's one of the co-founders of Mattel, is traveling Europe. And she sees the slutty Lily dolls and she's like, oh, girls in America will love this. And then in 1959, she debuts Barbie at the New York Toy Fair. Like, you can see that Barbie is just a spitting image of Lily. And apparently Ruth knew it too because she bought the rights to Build Lily and she put them out of business. Just something to remember when you watch the movie this month. Barbie was based on a girl who was way ahead of her time.
This is a very recent case, and it's the story of 8-year-old Jackson Mora. Having an 8-year-old son myself, this one really hits hard. Jackson lived in Michigan with his parents, Mia and Brian. The couple had been investigated multiple times by Child Protective Services over the treatment of Jackson, but he was never removed from their care. This is a prime example of being failed by the system. Jackson attended school at the Logan Autism Learning Centre, but the couple soon became sick of the teachers reporting them to CPS for mistreating Jackson, and they pulled him out. Brian Mora also has a daughter who used to live with the couple and Jackson. She stated to police that they didn't like to deal with their son as he smelt like urine, and they'd often lock him away in his bedroom, ignoring his cries. He even broke the bottom of his door so that he could stick his hand out. On May 3rd, 2022, 911 responded to a call from Jackson's grandmother. When they arrived at the Mora's home, they found Jackson laying on the couch, and it was clear that he hadn't only just passed away. Jackson was extremely thin, and the couple soon revealed to police that he'd actually passed away the day before. They hadn't called authorities because they wanted to spend time with their son before they came and took him away. Later that day, the couple were tested for drugs, and both tested positive for methamphetamine. Jackson's autopsy revealed that he was extremely malnourished. He weighed just 31 pounds, which medical records show was the same weight that he was at just 3 years old. His cause of death was neglect, and it was treated as a homicide. In June 2022, both Mia and Brian Mora were arrested and charged with 1 count each of first-degree murder. Both Mia and Brian had their charges reduced to second-degree murder after agreeing to plea deals. Mia agreed to serve a minimum of 25 years, and Brian agreed to serve a minimum of 22 years. On sentencing Mia, Judge Laseta criticised her for doing nothing as her autistic son wasted away before her eyes. She said, "He looked to you to protect him. I don't understand this. He weighed just 31 pounds at the age of 8 years old." On March 13th, 2023, Mora received a sentence of 25 to 50 years. And Brian Mora is due to be sentenced on April 17th, 2023.
These are the Tylenol murders, one of America's greatest mysteries. The Tylenol murders are a series of poisoning deaths that occurred in the Chicago area in September 1982. The case remains one of the most infamous instances of product tampering and led to significant changes in the packaging and marketing of all over-the-counter medications. In the early days of September 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area died after ingesting extra-strength Tylenol capsules that had been tampered with. The victims ranged in ages from 12 to 35, and their deaths were initially attributed to cyanide poisoning. The tampering occurred after the capsules were manufactured and before they reached the store shelves. An unknown person or persons had removed the Tylenol capsules from their original packaging, added cyanide to the pills, and then placed them back into the packages. The tampered bottles were then placed on store shelves for sale. The discovery of the poisoned Tylenol capsules led to widespread panic and fear. Authorities warned the public not to consume any Tylenol products, leading to a massive recall of over 31 million bottles of Tylenol capsules. Other pharmaceutical companies also pulled their products from shelves even though they had not been tampered with, due to concerns about copycat crimes. Law enforcement launched a massive investigation into the Tylenol murders but struggled to identify the culprit or culprits. The tampering appeared to be random and no connections were found between the victims. The perpetrator had seemingly contaminated Tylenol bottles at various locations. The media coverage of the Tylenol murders was extensive, and it had a lasting impact on public perception of product safety. The incident resulted in changes to the way companies package and seal over-the-counter medications to ensure the safety of consumers. No one has ever been charged or convicted in the connections with the Tylenol murders. However, the case prompted Congress to pass the Federal Anti-Tampering Act in 1983, making it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. The Tylenol murders serve as a chilling reminder of the potential dangers of product tampering and the importance of stricting security measures in the manufacturing and packaging of consumer goods. The victims' families and the public in general were forever changed by this act of intentional poisoning, and the case continues to be a cautionary tale.
This 60-year-old grandfather was murdered while playing Pokemon Go by an armed security guard. So this is Jiansheng Cheng. He was a grandfather who lived in Virginia, and he used to play Pokemon Go with his family members to connect with them. His family members said he played this game exclusively to get closer to members of his family and spend time with them. So on the night of January 26, 2017, Jiansheng was driving through a neighborhood, and he entered private property which belonged to a community clubhouse. 10 days earlier, he had been cited for trespassing on this private property, but on that evening, for some reason, he drove back in search of Pokemon. So that night, recognizing the same blue van, Jonathan Cromwell, an armed security guard, approached the grandfather. So according to the investigation, Jiansheng was in the parking lot of the clubhouse when Jonathan noticed him and stopped his vehicle directly in front of Jiansheng's. Jiansheng's car was effectively blocked in. He then put his car in reverse, turned his vehicle around so that it was in the entrance of the parking lot, so he was about to leave. And that's when Jonathan Cromwell, for some reason, exited his vehicle, screamed out stop, and then for some reason pulled out his weapon and fired 10 shots at the car. For some reason, Jonathan fired several rounds through the side window of the van and then went to the windshield and fired directly at Jiansheng through the windshield. The grandfather was hit 5 different times and died on scene. Now, this was tragic news for the community, and people saw this shooting as totally unneeded and unwarranted. But when they'd learn the full truth of the situation, people would get pissed. So Jonathan had lied and said that Jiansheng tried to ram him with his vehicle, which didn't happen. And he was originally charged with second-degree murder, but after new information came out, this charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. You see, Jonathan had a pretty disturbing history working as an armed security guard. In the past, he had drawn and brandished his weapon at people who were members of the clubhouse, guests of the Riverwalk neighborhood, and unarmed civilians. And he was known to go beyond the boundaries of his duties and use excessive force. This use of excessive force had actually gotten him fired from an employer in the past as well. So eventually in 2019, Jonathan Cromwell was found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This crime was just so unnecessary, and it's so shocking because a grandfather was literally murdered while playing a children's game that he loved playing with his kids.
Dad! What? Look at that. This is one of the worst Colombian cartel execution videos explained. This is Maria Vabla, and she was a 17-year-old girl who went missing, and immediately after this, her parents contacted authorities saying she had gone missing, which prompted a search. The authorities searched the farm she was supposedly supposed to be working at. However, authorities came across a gruesome discovery. They found a man's corpse missing his head, which proved Maria was in great danger. A video then started circulating online showing Maria staring blankly into the camera. She had her hands tied behind her back and was already beaten bad by her captors. However, all hope to finding Maria faded when another terrible video began to circulate on the internet, showing the unfortunate end Maria suffered. The video is short and it's around 33 seconds, but it's absolutely grotesque and disturbing. As you play the video, you're met with pure savagery. The setting is in a wooded area and it's shot during the daytime. Immediately, you see Maria's corpse lying on the ground and you hear her killers talking in the background. The camera then focuses on her exposed stomach and you see a cartel member taking a knife that has a hook shape, cutting a vertical gash down her abdominal area. He slices in a downward motion from the top of her abdominal to the bottom of her stomach area. And you hear awful noises as the blade cuts through flesh. It's extremely graphic and it's just awful. Maria's stomach and intestines are exposed and it appears the killer is trying to cut them out. He pulls on her intestines and what also appears to be her stomach, and slowly they come out of Maria's body as he pulls, and eventually he cuts out Maria's stomach and several feet of intestines. He then holds Maria's guts up to the camera as the other cartel members continue to talk. You then get a clear shot of Maria's body and it looks like the cartel member has completely disemboweled her. The killer then throws her guts on the ground and the video then concludes. How Maria was killed is unknown, but in the video you see lots of blood on her face and head, which means she might have suffered a head injury that killed her. The motive for the murder seems to be completely unknown, but people online suspect she was involved romantically with a suspected gang member. But that is not confirmed at all. Maria's body was found in a river in September 2022 and was returned to her family for a proper burial. The murder of Maria to this day is unsolved, and this case and video is absolutely sickening. Whatever you do, never go looking for this video, and hopefully this explanation was enough to make you less curious.
This model's body was found in her pool. Police had to work out whether it was a callous murder or a tragic accident. Samira FR was a 38-year-old French model who lived a lavish lifestyle until her tragic death in 2014. Samira lived in the lovely community of Golden Eagle in Florida. On the 22nd of February 2014, her body was discovered in her garden swimming pool. A handyman and his son had a horrific shock when they found her body deceased in the pool. Now, Samira's sandals were actually in the pool, one tucked under a hose that was in the water. Initially, it wasn't clear whether she'd been murdered or had simply fallen into the pool and drowned by accident. Now, she came from more humble beginnings, initially being born into poverty, but becoming famous for her beauty. She made a name for herself doing catwalks in Paris and met a man who caught her eye in 2006. This was Dr. Adam Frash, who was a podiatrist. The pair got married in Vegas and they got a property in Florida. They had 2 daughters together and enjoyed their lavish lifestyle. However, it would all come crashing down following the discovery of Samira's body. Investigators soon realised that the evidence didn't match up with an accidental drowning theory. Samira's sandals that were found off in the pool actually had straps, so they wouldn't just be able to fall off her feet. Then a shocking report from the medical examiner. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, showing damage to both sides of her skull. This was extremely unlikely to happen by accident from a fall. Now, they ruled out the handyman and his son from the CCTV evidence, which showed that the pair had simply just turned up a few minutes before calling police. So they started to look at potential enemies that Samira might have had. One of these was her husband's friend, Kendall, who was quite open about his dislike for Samira. He said that they didn't get on because of how much time he spent with her husband, but he actually had an alibi on the day of the murder. Then police interviewed Adam, the husband, who told them that the day before his wife's death, she complained to him that she was really tired and run down and needed a break. He said that he offered to take the 2 kids to their beach house 3 hours away. He said the morning of her death, he left with the kids and she was still in bed. However, it soon came to light that the pair were actually in the middle of getting a divorce. Adam had been allegedly having affairs. There was also a disturbing history of DV between the two of them, and Samira had even been arrested for domestic battery against him. When he was questioned, Adam had visible scratch marks on his face, and a man claimed that Adam had admitted the killing to him. Ultimately, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife. This chilling case is described as Melbourne's most brutal unsolved double killing. Suzanne Armstrong was a 28-year-old single mother. She was living with 27-year-old Susan Bartlett, who was working as a teacher. Susan worked at the Collingwood Education Centre and the pair were high school friends. It was 1977 and they'd been living in their apartment on Easy Street for 10 weeks. It was a nice home for the pair and they shared it with Suzanne's 16-month-old son Gregory and their pet German Shepherd puppy. On the evening of the 10th of January 1977, Susan's brother and his girlfriend had popped round. They ate food with the pair and watched TV, and then they eventually headed home around 9 p.m. The following day, the neighbours found the German Shepherd puppy wandering around the streets looking lost. They also heard what could be described as whimpering from a child coming from the apartment. It would be 3 days later that the neighbours decided to actually take a look into the apartment and tried to enter via the back door. Upsettingly, Gregory was found in his cot very distressed and dehydrated. He was anxious and understandably very hungry. Then they made a shocking discovery. The women's bodies were found near the front of the property deceased. Suzanne was found on her bed and Susan was found lying in the hallway next to Suzanne's room. They had multiple stab wounds each and Suzanne had been AR'd following her death. When police arrived, they took a DNA sample from this. The police determined both women had been killed on the night of the 10th of January. Strangely, there was no signs of forced entry, but there was a boot print on one of the windowsills, which could have been a point of entry. Whoever had killed these women had cleaned up in the bathroom before leaving via the back door. They had left the gate open, hence the puppy walking around. The murder weapon was never recovered. Police compiled a list of over 100 persons of interest in this case, including construction workers who were in the area near the time. They tested the DNA that they found on Suzanne's body against some of the prime suspects in the case, but had no luck. Now, it is speculated that the murders may be linked to the disappearance of a woman nearby called Julie. She had actually disappeared from her apartment in Melbourne on the 1st of July 1975. Disturbingly, the suspect in her disappearance had actually been staying in the house next to the Easy Street killings on that night. The case frustratingly went cold and has still never been solved. In 2017, 40 years after the murders, police actually offered a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to the apprehension and conviction of those responsible. This case will make you terrified to go to Target. Kelsey Smith was 17 years old, living in Kansas. On the 2nd of June 2007, she decided to head over to Target for the evening. It was roughly around 7 p.m. and she was planning on getting her boyfriend a gift to celebrate their 6 months together. While inside the shop, she spoke to her mum on the phone and Kelsey left shortly after. Later that evening, when she failed to return home, her concerned family called the police. Worryingly, about 4 hours after, Kelsey's car was discovered in a Macy's car park across the road. Now, Kelsey was nowhere to be seen, but to her family's concern, some of her belongings were discovered in the car. This included the gift that she bought for her boyfriend and her bag and purse. Now, police examined CCTV from the Target and found that she'd left at around 7:07 p.m. All seemed normal at first. She was just leaving the store and heading to her car in the car park. However, very disturbingly, investigators saw what looked like someone running towards her, and the images captured a male pushing Kelsey into her car. On closer inspection of the CCTV, police were able to notice a male seemingly following Kelsey round the shop. Although he didn't speak to her or approach her, he definitely was kind of following her around the store. He always ended up in the same aisle that she was in, and he seemed to be looking at her. Investigators released the CCTV images to the public in hopes of getting some tips. This would prove to be vital in the investigation. Now, the CCTV from the Macy's car park showed Kelsey's car being left there at 9:17 p.m. This was around 2 hours after she left the Target. Interestingly, a person with a white top and seemingly like dark coloured trousers was seen leaving the car there. The person was then captured running away from the scene, and the clothing matched what the suspect from the Target CCTV was wearing. When police tried to get Kelsey's phone records from her phone company, they were strangely hesitant. It would actually take 4 whole days for them to agree to give over the information. Now they were finally able to identify where Kelsey's phone had last pinged, and this was a tower near Grandview in Missouri. Tragically, when search teams were deployed, it wasn't long before they discovered Kelsey's body. The autopsy showed that she had been SA'd prior to her death and then strangled with her own belt. Meanwhile, the suspect's neighbour had called the police. She'd seen the news appeals for information and recognised the man as 26-year-old Edwin Hall. Now, he was actually reportedly off on holiday with his partner and son when police showed up. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Forensics were also able to find his fingerprints on the inside of Kelsey's car, despite him protesting his innocence. It's believed that he abducted Kelsey at gunpoint and drove her to the secluded area before killing her. He eventually pleaded guilty to all charges and was given life without parole. The case led to the birth of the Kelsey Smith Act. Now, the law states that phone companies can ping a phone if police believe that the owner is in danger, and most US states have now passed this law.
This is the murder of Eric Hingston. Eric was 83 years old when he was murdered. His bedroom window was open, a set of ladders were placed outside, and a scene of open drawers and missing jewellery suggested a robbery gone wrong. But there was something far more sinister that the police had yet to uncover. Eric was a retired butcher, and in his younger years he was a member of Churchill's Special Operations Executive in World War II. He was one of the heroes chosen by Churchill himself to fly behind enemy lines into Germany and set Europe ablaze, defeating the Nazis. A wonderful man who lived a full life. Eric had been married, had children and grandchildren, but tragically lost his wife in the early 80s. Just 18 months after his wife's death, Eric met and married a woman named Audrey. Audrey was also a widow, having lost her husband to a heart attack. Audrey and Eric were both looking for the same thing in a new partner: company. Eric's family called it a marriage of convenience. They both lost their life partners and were lonely. His children were worried that he'd rushed into this marriage and didn't know much about his new wife. As the marriage went on, the couple had an active social life and were known around the village as the local old couple. Unfortunately, as Eric grew older, his health deteriorated. He ended up with a hip replacement, a catheter, and became severely asthmatic. Audrey begrudgingly became his carer. The couple's social life soon came to a stop, and Audrey was not happy with this. She hated being stuck inside caring for her sick husband, and soon came up with a plan to get rid of him for good. On August 28, 2003, 81-year-old Audrey put her plan into action. She placed a ladder outside Eric's open bedroom window, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, went up the stairs and stabbed her sleeping husband in the shoulder, breaking his collarbone, which then punctured his lung. This single stab wound was fatal. Audrey then staged a robbery, opening drawers in the bedroom and placing some of her jewellery into black bin bags. She then waited 2 hours before calling an ambulance, saying, "We've been attacked. My husband's on the floor. Please come quickly. I think he's dead." When police arrived, Audrey was really tearful, saying that 2 men had attacked them, killed Eric and ransacked the house. Audrey then put out a heartfelt plea for anyone with information to come forwards, and it was surprisingly convincing.
Somebody somewhere knows who did this. I ask them, and my family asks them, to please contact the police. If you have any information at all, please pass it to the police. On a personal note, may I thank you for all the love and kindness you've shown us. But please, please do anything you can to help us. Thank you.
She even went as far as pointing the finger at 2 men that she'd seen walking around the village. Thankfully, they had cast iron alibis when questioned by police. After 5 weeks of looking for Eric's killer, forensic examinations proved that there was nobody else in the house that night, and Audrey's lies unravelled. She eventually confessed to her son that she'd been the one to kill Eric. In March 2004, Audrey pleaded not guilty to murder, and instead pleaded guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. On sentencing Audrey, Mrs. Justice Hallett said, It's a very sad day to see a woman of your age and background in the dock for the killing of your husband and covering it up in such a cold and calculating way. Audrey was sentenced to 2 years, making her Britain's oldest woman at the time to be jailed. Eric's family were really disappointed with the sentence, saying, "We feel betrayal, disappointment and anger. If someone kills another person, then they should pay the price. We believe that Audrey should have got at least 5 years. We've got to accept it, but it's destroyed our faith in the justice system." Audrey served just 1 year of her 2-year sentence and was released in 2005. She then passed away in 2016, aged 83.